Real quickly, before we begin, hello everyone, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing to this new channel, Forgotten History of the US. Sit back, relax, and get your favorite beverage. This narration is going to be given to you raw and unedited. Imagine waking before the sun rises on a vast open plain somewhere in the American West in the year 1847. The wind moves softly across the tall prairie grass, and the faint glow of a dying campfire flickers beside the circle of wagons. Dozens of families, men, women, and children, are beginning another exhausting day, a long journey west. For these pioneers, traveling the Oregon Trail every day was a struggle for survival. Disease, hunger, extreme weather, and even wild animals constantly threatened their lives. The trail stretched over 2,000 miles from Missouri to the valleys of Oregon, and the trip could take 4 to 6 months. The day usually began early in the morning, and the wagon master, watchman, would wake the camp before sunrise. The nights were cold. Even during the summer months, families had to sleep bundled in blankets or buffalo hide. Most pioneers did not sleep inside wagons. Wagons were tightly packed with supplies, flour, tools, spare wagon parts, clothing, and sometimes even family heirlooms. Instead, families slept on the ground beside the wagons, often under the canvas lean-to or simply under the open sky. Children slept close to their parents, while the older boys sometimes would sleep closer to the livestock to keep watch. As the first light appeared, fires were rekindled. Breakfast was prepared. Breakfast was rarely anything sophisticated. Most mornings it would include salted pork and bacon, hard bread biscuits, coffee, cornmeal mush, or oatmeal. Fresh food was rare in those days. The first few weeks, then it was gone. Many families began the journey with barrels of flour, dried beans, rice, and cured meat. Fresh vegetables and fruit would spoil so quick. If they were lucky, the pioneers might can gather wild berries or catch fish from the nearby river. Their morning routine consisted of packing and cooking. Women prepared food and packed cooking utensils. Children gathered firewood or helped herd animals. Men checked wagon wheels, axles, and oxen harness, and then there was a matter of using the restroom. There was no bathroom at all on the trails, so most pioneers simply walked away from camp in the grass and went behind the bushes. Privacy was minimal. Families tried to move a short distance from camp from water sources to prevent contamination, because that would just be terrible. In busy camps with dozens of wagons, the surrounding prairie would quickly become unpleasant. Flies were constant companions. Poor sanitation was a real problem, and it increased the spread of disease. When the wagons began moving by 8 a.m., each wagon was pulled by 4 to 6 oxen. Oxen were preferred over horses because they were stronger and cheaper. A typical wagon would move the family 10 to 15 miles per day, so travel was slow and rough. The wagons would bounce violently across uneven ground. Children often walked beside the wagon to lighten the load on the animals. Some children walked hundreds of miles. Dust was another constant problem. When dozens of wagons traveled together, they created thick clouds of dust that coated clothing, skin, and even food. By noontime, the heat of the plains was so brutal that temperatures would reach well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Shade was very limited. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Around midday, the wagons would stop for a short break, and then lunch would commence. They would have bacon, pork, beans, leftover biscuits. Sometimes hunters in the group managed to shoot buffalo down, deer, antelope. When this happened, it was a wonderful feast and celebration. Buffalo meat was one of the most valuable food sources on the plains. Pioneers dried excess meat into jerky so it could last for weeks. Drying meats was a very important skill, but still, hunger was common. Many pioneers miscalculated how much food they would need, and they would have to ration supplies. Disease was one of the deadliest dangers of the pioneers. In fact, more pioneers died from illness than attacks or accidents. Some of the most common diseases were dysentery. Victims would vomit, have diarrhea, dehydration, and they could die within hours. The entire wagon train sometimes would lose dozens of people to outbreaks and typhoid fever and measles. The measles could spread rapidly amongst children in wagon trails. For adults, it was usually survivable, but for the young children, they had the hardest time with measles. Medical care on the trail was primitive. Few wagons, trains had trained doctors. Instead, families relied on home remedies and folk medicine. The common medical treatments included willow bark tea for fever and pain, mustard applied to the skin to draw out illness, turpentine, sometimes used on wounds, and other things. Women often would carry herbal medicines they learned from family traditions. Some of these remedies were helpful, but there were also a lot of them that were dangerous, especially the mercury-based medicines that were sometimes used, and as a result, accidentally poisoning patients. If someone became seriously ill, the wagon train usually had to keep moving, so graves were made along the way on the trail, and it became a very common thing to have graves along the trail. Many were buried beside the trail. The graves sometimes were hidden beneath wagon tracks to prevent animals from digging them up. After a short rest, the wagon train would resume its slow journey. Afternoons were often the hardest part of the day. The sun was so hot, the animals grew tired, and tempers sometimes flared. Oxen were stubborn creatures and often needed constant encouragement. Drivers would shout, "Gee!" to turn right, "Haw!" to turn left. Travelers crossed rivers, rocky paths, muddy stretches of ground that would trap the wagons. River crossings were especially dangerous. Some wagons had to be floated across rivers, often attempted to ford shallow crossings. Many pioneers drowned attempting their crossings. Weather along the Oregon Trail could change suddenly. Thunderstorms could roll across the plains with little warning. Lightning struck the open prairie frequently. Heavy rain turned dirt paths into thick mud, making wagons nearly impossible to move. Heat exhaustion was common. Travelers sometimes would walk for hours under the blazing sun with very little water, and the nights were brutally cold. During the winter times, there had its own dangers. If a wagon train left Missouri too late in the season, they risked being trapped in the snow in the Rocky Mountains. This fate famously struck the Donner family. Wild animals were another concern. The most common predators the pioneers had to encounter were wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, and bears in the mountains. Wolves often followed wagon trails, hoping to get scraps or dead animals. At night, pioneers would form a circle of wagons known as the corral to protect livestock. Men took turns standing guard with rifles. Attacks were rare, but livestock could be killed if left unprotected. By late afternoon or early evening, the wagon train stopped for the day. The wagons were arranged in a loose circle or semicircle. Livestock, oxen, cattle, and horses were brought inside the circle for safety. Evening chores began immediately. Men repaired wagons and tended to the animals. Women cooked dinner over open fires. Children gathered firewood and fetched water. They had a whole system. Everyone in the family had responsibility. Dinner often consisted of beans, bacon, and biscuits and coffee. If the group had hunted successfully, fresh meat might be roasted over the fire. Despite the hardships, evenings sometimes included music and storytelling. Many pioneers brought fiddles and harmonicas. Singing helped lift their spirits during tough days. The Oregon Trail was littered with graves. Historians estimate that over 20,000 pioneers died during the westward migration. Graves were very simple and common. A shallow pit dug beside the trail, a wooden marker, or sometimes no marker at all. Families had little time to mourn. The wagon train had to keep moving. The story of the Oregon Trail is often told as a journey of white settlers, but surprisingly enough, there were black pioneers who were also a part of the westward migration. Some traveled as free settlers seeking opportunity and land in the West, and others were enslaved individuals brought by slaveholders headed west. One notable example was George Washington Bush, a black pioneer who traveled west with his family in the 1840s. Bush eventually settled in the Pacific Northwest and became one of the region's successful early farmers. Black cowboys, laborers, and settlers helped build communities across the frontier. Their stories are only now receiving the recognition that they deserve. As darkness would settle across the prairie wide, campfires slowly burned down. Families gathered under blankets beside their wagons. The prairie sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with stars brighter than most I've ever seen. But the sleep was never really that peaceful. Crying babies, restless oxen, distant wolves that were howling, and the constant wind across the plains reminded the pioneers that they were indeed in the wilderness. Then they would rise the next day in another 10 to 15 miles, and again, this was their daily life. A day of dust, hunger, sickness, and uncertainty, but also hope, reaching westward for a new life, new beginning. Because at the end of the trail waited that fertile land. The Oregon Trail was more than just a migration route. It was a test of endurance, resilience, and courage. Thousands of ordinary families faced the dangers most of us could hardly imagine today. Their daily lives were filled with hardships, disease, hunger, death, harsh weather, and constant risk. Yet they kept moving west, mile after mile, chasing the opportunity across the continent, across the country, across the plains. And their journey helped shape the history of the American frontier. Thank you for listening. Until next time, have a good day.